and we'd like to welcome you to this 1 hour code breaker. As you get settled, a few reminders to please use the Q&A section for any questions today, and remember to be constructive in any of those questions or comments to the presenter and to one another to ensure that we have a session that is productive. And as always, the webinar content and additional resources will be available online shortly after the session. Today's webinar, which will focus on energy code requirements, is brought to you by Energy Code ACE and qualifies for one AIA HSW learning unit for those who watch live. And AIA California will report that for you once you finish the session in full. It also offers 1 hour of ZNCD coursework. And now to quickly introduce our presenter. Gina Griffith-Strada is currently the principal and owner of Gable Energy in Castro Valley and has been in the energy modeling field since 1991. Gina is the instructor of several dozen full-day Energy Code ACE trainings on the residential and non-residential Title 24, Part 6, Building Energy Efficiency Standards for Building Department Staff, energy consultants, engineers, and architects. She is also a certified energy analyst and lead accredited professional and a Title 24 energy analyst performing a wide range of responsibilities in both residential and non-residential construction pertaining to compliance standards and energy modeling. She is a respected subject matter expert informing the statewide code development process as well. Now on to today's presentation. Gina, it's always wonderful to see you. Please take it away.
I'm going to have to simplify that intro for you. Okay, welcome everyone. Let me just get all my windows open again so that I can see any questions that you guys have. I am going to be concentrating on the Q&A part of the Zoom tools regarding any questions that you have. So please put those questions in there and that would be great. And let's get going into this. So I've been an energy consultant in California since the early 90s. That's how long I have been doing this, started doing it the minute I got out of college. And wow, we sure have grown from what the code was in 1990, let me tell you. We will be sending certificates to all of you guys. I think, Rebecca, do you help us with that? I forget who sends what, but we're going to make sure that you guys get your CEUs for attending today. And what I plan on talking to you guys is, well, what is the scope of the energy code? I find a lot of people, the number one question they ask me is, Gene, I'm only doing this. Did I trigger the code? Of which 99% of the time I'm like, yeah. So let's talk about where the code says what the triggers are and what exceptions can we rely on that are within the scope section of the energy code. But then we really want to talk about how the certificate of compliance documents that is required to be provided when we submit for permit for a project that does trigger the energy code, how can it be used as a tool? I don't know how many of you have actually looked at that report and read it and made sure it reflects what your design is supporting. Because by you signing off on those certificate of compliance forms, you are taking responsibility as dictated by the Business and Professions Code Division 3. So don't sign and take responsibility for something that you're not really sure reflects your design. And these papers aren't just throwaway papers. I'd like people to use them as a checklist against how their designing is meeting the client goals, is meeting the state goals, and is also meeting any zero net carbon design goals the project might be trying to achieve. I'm hoping all of you have heard of Energy Code ACE because we have done quite a few of these sessions with you guys in the past. We have tools. We are in the process right now of updating our virtual compliance assistant. It's a tool that helps you document your non-residential, multifamily, and hotel motel projects. At this time, the virtual compliance assistant does not support single family. That's in large part because most of the single family compliance forms will be required to be registered with a HERS provider, and Energy Code ACE is not a HERS provider. We also have training. We're in the process of updating all of our training for the 2025 code cycle, and I'll tell you about some classes specific to the 2025 code at the end of my presentation. And resources. These are fact sheets on specific topics, like we have a non-residential envelope fact sheet. We have a multifamily envelope fact sheet, and we have a single family envelope fact sheet that includes all scopes of work, new construction, additions and alterations, and how the energy code supports those building features and those occupancies. All of this is available at our website at no cost because we are a codes and standards program here in California. So let's talk about what code is going to apply when. Okay, so if the project submits for permit, that very first time submitting it for permit, and it submits for permit after January 1st of 2023, that was almost 3 years ago, and by December 31st of this year, you are subject to the 2022 code. If you submit for permit that very first time and you pay all your fees, most building departments will not truly log you in until you pay the fees. You will be subject to the 2025 code if that submittal happens as of January 1st of next year. I don't know if you guys are shocked to realize today is October 9th. I don't know how that happened. I cannot believe it's October already. I have yet to decorate for Halloween. But December is going to be here so much faster than you think. Now's the time to really be thinking of all the projects you have on your desk, all the projects you have in the hopper, and communicate with your clients. Hey, guess what? There's a big code change happening. And if we don't submit for a permit before the end of the year for the work we've done to date, we might have to redesign and consider how your project has to meet the 2025 building code and not the 2022 code. And then also make sure you're paying attention to when your building departments will be open. Typically with this type of crunch, the building departments close the last 2 weeks of the year, right? Now, some building departments will allow leniency of submitting a project the month of January to give you flexibility with 2022 versus 2025, but that is not across the board. So also research, when are you going to get it into the building department so that it can be stamped as received to be subject to the 2022 code? At Energy Code ACE, we like to use these 3 colors and symbols to represent mandatory versus prescriptive versus performance. Mandatory measures are, you got to do them. He's got to do them, and they're specific to building type. So my mandatory measures for single family will be different from my mandatory measures for any other building type. My mandatory measures, though, will not change based on climate zone. My mandatory measures typically do not change based on scope of work. Mandatory measures must apply for new construction, additions, and alterations equally. Mandatory measures are not typically included into our compliance documents. It is expected that you, the designer, and the contractor are well aware of the mandatory requirements of the energy code, and you're just automatically going to incorporate those into the design and the construction of the building. I do not find that's true. I always like to do a little pop quiz. I was at a big mechanical engineering session yesterday with 70 engineers in the room. There's so many jokes I could say about that, but 70 engineers in the room. And I asked them 5 basic mandatory questions about current code, and only one person in that room was able to answer one of them. So please really consider what the mandatory requirements are. Work with whoever is helping you with your compliance calculations, your compliance design to the energy code, and confirm that you are incorporating all the mandatory requirements in your designs. Then we have 2 ways to show compliance to the energy code. We can show compliance via the prescriptive approach to the prescriptive measures of the energy code. The prescriptive measures of the energy code will change based on climate zone. They will change based on scope of work. That's because prescriptive measures must show cost effectiveness, that they will save enough of the energy associated with the measure for that energy savings to pay for itself over that building feature's lifetime. And that's why the energy code is so complex. We have all these weird triggers. We have all these unique exceptions. We have these 16 climate zones. We have these different parts of the code. Go to new construction over here and go to alterations over there. Because for new construction, that is the least expensive time to integrate energy efficiency. So the energy code is going to be a lot more robust to new construction than it will be for alterations, which is the most expensive time to integrate energy efficiency. Now, the performance approach is an alternative means of showing compliance to the energy code. And this is using CEC approved software to basically manipulate the compliance features of the building. Hey, I want some leniency on the wall insulation requirements, but I'm going to offset that penalty I'm going to get for not meeting the prescriptive wall insulation requirements by improving my window package over what's required by the energy code. And the software is going to do that evaluation to confirm that the design is meeting the same energy savings of the prescriptive approach, but supporting the flexibility of those prescriptive measures all the way down to a mandatory minimum, but you will never, ever be allowed to trade away mandatory minimums when using the performance approach. Zero net carbon design. I'm sure all of you guys are up to speed on this. We have done this slide with you guys many times. Things have been shifting in California and they continue to shift. And we have seen that Cal Green has new embodied carbon requirements. It was a intervening code adoption. There are going to be some changes for the 2025 Cal Green Code in which the trigger is going to change from 100,000 square feet for a non-residential building down to 50,000 square feet. And that is the same trigger for school buildings when we talk about embodied carbon. Now, when we're talking about all these assembly bills, I can't leave off the table Assembly Bill 130. So AB 130 was adopted a couple months ago. And within AB 130, and there's a lot there, all of you should be spending time reading that assembly bill if you haven't already, because there's 5 major aspects of AB 130. I'm only going to talk about one of them, of which included within AB 130, starting October this month of this year through June of 2031, the Energy Code, Title 24, Part 6, and Cal Green, Title 24, Part 11, will not be allowed to change stringency at all for residential occupancies in that 6-year time period. So for the first time since the building code incorporated the energy code back in the early, it was 1978, we are not going to be on a 3-year code cycle update for residential occupancies. It's going to be 6 years. We're going to skip a code cycle. Non-residential occupancies will still be able to be revised and updated in the 2028 code cycle, but nothing associated with residential, which is single family, multifamily, hotel, motel, and any other R occupancies such as senior living facilities. So embodied carbon is covered by Cal Green, and that's going to really talk about where are we sourcing our products, where are we manufacturing, or how are we manufacturing our products, and how are we bringing those products to the build site. Then we're living in the building. And operational carbon is what the energy code is all about. At the end of the lifetime of the building, then we start talking about the recyclability of those building features. That is covered by Cal Green, Title 24, Part 11, as part of the embodied carbon requirements. And the energy code really has nothing to say about the recyclability of the products. Let's just concentrate on the energy code though right now and talk about how the tools that we have to meet the energy code can be a great resource. But first, I want to talk about the scope and the triggers of the energy code. First, we need to know our occupancies. So occupancy C, organized campgrounds. I don't know how many of you guys work with campgrounds. I find campgrounds will have a mix of buildings. Some of them are R occupancy. Some even might be A or B occupancy, and some might be C. If they are C, they're exempt to the energy code in its entirety because occupancy C is not subject to the energy code. Occupancy I3, those are jails, prisons, correctional facilities, and I4, daycare facilities, are exempt to the energy code because building that building to burn as slowly as possible to give us time to get those people out of the building because of the fact they can't get out on their own takes precedence. We have a new occupancy for the 2025 code cycle. Occupancy L has historically been exempt to the energy code, but starting January 1st of next year, occupancy L will be subject to the energy code in its entirety. And in fact, they have added some more aggressive energy code requirements regarding the mechanical systems serving laboratory spaces that if you work in the laboratory world, you need to be aware of what's changing for the next code cycle. Table 100.0-A. So I run a mentoring group here in California for the Certified Energy Analyst program, and everyone there knows that they don't call it Table 100.0-A. We call it Gina's favorite table. And this is in the very first subchapter of the Energy Code. And I'm hoping you guys are at least aware of this. This is the index to the Energy Code. And the Energy Code is developed in a way that makes absolutely no sense to the majority of us out here, where we have a section that talks about scope. Okay, that's great. That matches all the rest of the building codes. We have a chapter just on definitions. Great, okay, that matches the rest of the building code. But then we have a series of mandatory chapters for just non-residential and hotel motel occupancies. And then we have another set of chapters for mandatory requirements for multifamily buildings. And then we have another chapter is the mandatory requirements for single family. And then we start it all over again. And now we have different chapters for envelope versus mechanical versus water heating for non-residential and hotel motel buildings for new construction and those prescriptive requirements. And then we have a completely different set of chapters supporting additions and alterations to existing buildings. So if I just want to know what's happening for envelope of a conditioned building, meaning it has mechanical heating and cooling, that is a non-residential or hotel motel occupancy, I have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 subchapters to get the full picture associated with a project, especially if it's an addition or an alteration. Understanding the structure of the energy code is a challenge. You don't have to. Use Gina's favorite table, Table 100.0-A, and it's going to help you identify exactly where you need to go when we talk about the energy code. Dave has a comment or a question here with a code restructuring initiative. Okay, so we have been working really hard on supporting a restructure of the energy code so that it would match the building codes, where we would have one chapter just for scope and definitions, like we do have already in the energy code. But then the second chapter would be everything about envelope, mandatory, prescriptive, additions and alterations, non-residential, hotel, motel, multifamily, single family, everything about the envelope is in one chapter. Then the next chapter is mechanical. The next chapter is water heating. And this is just like the rest of the building code. Due to AB 130, those efforts are going to have to be put on pause, potentially until 2031, because it's changing things in terms of how we look at them for residential occupancies. But we are really hoping that the Energy Commission will publish that alternative approach to looking at the energy code. It won't be adopted language, but it would be an alternative way to navigate the energy code. And we'll be finding out within the next couple of weeks if that's something that the Energy Commission is going to be able to support. So hold on to that, Dave. Something exciting might be coming our way to help us out, even though it might not be locked into actual code language. Scope of the energy code. So we talked about, hey, the occupancy matters. Make sure you know the occupancy. Whenever I get a question through our help desk at Energy Code ACE, my number one question is, what's the scope of the work? 2, what is your occupancy or occupancies of the building? And 3, where is the building? climate zone matters. So envelope features of qualified historic buildings do not have to meet the energy code. Now, what's important here is that it's qualified as is dictated by the historic code, which I'm blanking right now on what that code body is. Dave, I don't know if you can help me with that. Now, this doesn't mean you get an exception for adding on to a historic building and you're trying to match the flavor of that qualified historic building. This only applies to existing envelope features that are to remain, such as single pane wood framed windows, such as exposed brick facade, things that currently do not meet the energy code. But because it's a qualified historic building, we want to keep those features and not change them to meet the energy code. Envelope features associated with unconditioned spaces. Now, the energy code defines what is a conditioned space, and that's a space that has mechanical heating or cooling over a certain threshold, of which now then every single envelope feature, the walls, the windows, the floors, the roof, the roofing material, the air barrier, everything associated with that envelope will have to meet current code. If it's unconditioned, meaning there is no mechanical heating or cooling that meets that threshold, the only envelope requirement we're going to have that's going to apply for that space or that building is going to be daylighting, in which if we have large voluminous spaces with a ceiling that's really high off the ground, we want to introduce skylights or vertical windows in a way that illuminates at least 75% of the floor so that we use less electric lighting. Covered process environments that are subject to other requirements. So if I have a refrigerated warehouse that's less than 3,000 square feet, it is not subject to the energy code. It's actually subject to the appliance standards here in California, Title 20. So there are some things that are going to be subject to the energy code, such as a refrigerated warehouse that's greater than 3,000 square feet. Now, everything about that particular environment and the equipment serving it would have to meet the energy code. So we need to be aware of thresholds that are going to be either other code bodies or the energy code. Temporary buildings in response to natural disasters, if the building department approves. So we've had a lot of fires here in California in the last many years. And one of the things that has been supported with the rebuild efforts is that homeowners can build maybe a small ADU on their property and live in that building while they're working on rebuilding the main home. Now, some of those structures were identified as temporary buildings, meaning after a certain time period, they are to be removed. But we found a lot of those buildings, people wanted to keep them. So we had to convert the temporary building permit to a permanent building permit, of which then now that structure needs to meet the energy code. So just be aware for temporary buildings and structures, if that is something you're working on, think about what happens at the end of that temporary permit. What might we do with it afterwards? And maybe that might change how you go about supporting that project to begin with. Triggers to the energy code. If it's a newly constructed building, well, that's a definition of that as a building that has never been used or occupied for any purpose. This does support TI buildings. So if I have built a tenant building, I have no tenants in the building, and it took 10 years before I could get that very first tenant to go and actually occupy the square footage of my building. 10 years later, that tenant taking over that space that's never been occupied before now triggers the code in play at the time they move in and do any work to that space. It will be considered a newly constructed project and will have to meet whatever energy code is in play at the time, just like new construction. And that can be very difficult. So like right now, if I have a TI building that was built 10 years ago, very first tenant goes in, and this happened to me at least 5 projects last year, they trigger the PV and battery requirements of this 2022 code cycle because it's a newly constructed building and was an occupancy that triggers the PV and battery requirements. It's really hard to consider how to put PV and battery into a building that's already built and that never took those particular building features into consideration. Additions and newly conditioned. So an addition is where I'm adding conditioned floor area and volume for the first time. And that could be, hey, I added on an office space to my existing office building. All of the features of that addition, the walls, the floors, the mechanical systems, windows, everything has to meet current code as an addition. But if I'm not making any changes to the existing building, I don't have to do anything for the existing building, only if I'm choosing to make changes such as maybe upgrade the lighting. Well, now that lighting needs to meet the energy code because you're making changes. The one that always gets people is newly conditioned spaces. Newly conditioned spaces is where I'm taking an existing unconditioned space that's enclosed and conditioning it with mechanical heating or cooling that meets certain thresholds for the very first time. And now that building of what's being conditioned for the first time, the walls, the floors, the roof, the roofing material, the windows, everything has to meet current code as an addition. So as new construction. So I've had many, many projects where they've taken an old warehouse building. It's all brick walls. It's single pane, metal pane windows. There's huge, humongous skylights in the space, and they add a heater. And they don't realize by adding that heater that was never there before, all of those existing features now have to meet the energy code as new construction. And that can be very challenging. Ian is asking, 140.3C is a prescriptive requirement for daylighting, but how likely is it that a building could meet the performance requirement if 20% of the floor area is large enclosed spaces without daylighting? 20% of the floor is large enclosed spaces. Ian, you might have me tell me more about what you are considering large enclosed spaces without daylighting, because the whole point behind that measure is you have a large voluminous room. It's not a building, it's a room in which the ceiling to that room is greater than 15 feet from the floor. If you have areas built into a large space, I've seen lots of like warehouses where they build in an office space and it has its own hard ceiling. Well, that ceiling is not that roof way up here. The ceiling is the ceiling to that office space that is tucked into my large voluminous warehouse. So I'm looking room by room. I'm not looking building by building. Alterations is anytime I am changing an existing building feature that is subject to the energy code and you're altering it. And now you only have to meet the energy code requirements for that altered feature and not everything else. So I'm just going to replace one window. I don't have to replace any other windows, but I will have to meet the energy code requirements for that one window I'm changing. I also find a lot if we're changing occupancies. So if I am changing the occupancy, let's say from office to retail, I didn't trigger the energy code. But if I'm making any changes to the space, now that it's retail, I will have to meet the energy code requirements for retail spaces for the altered features only for when I do any work to that space after the change in occupancy. You do not trigger the code when it's something that's defined as a repair. And that's a reconstruction or renewal of any component, system, or equipment of an existing building without increasing the energy use. So I'm going to replace a window, and that is going to be the glazing and the framing. If I'm only replacing the glass, that's automatically a repair and does not trigger the energy code. But if I am replacing the entire window component, glazing and framing, that is defined as an alteration by the energy code. So if I'm doing that repair where I'm replacing the glass, if the window that got broken was a dual pane window and I put in a single pane piece of glass, I have increased the energy use. and that is no longer exempt to the energy code. Now it's going to be considered an alteration, and you're going to have to meet the mandatory and prescriptive requirements of the energy code because you're changing the energy usage associated with that repaired building feature. So what do you guys think? If you wouldn't mind putting this into the chat so that we could keep the question and answers in the Q&A section, which project scope is not going to be subject to the energy code? Building a new home, adding an office space to an existing occupancy B building, replacing windows for a multifamily historic facade, replacing an HVAC system of a historic building. It's kind of crazy to me, but I have had someone come to me and go, we're replacing the HVAC system, and it's a coal burning something, and we want to replace it with the same thing. I'm like, no, you can't. An HVAC piece of equipment is not going to be considered a historic feature of the building, and no, that's not going to work. You guys are right. That is going to be C, replacing windows. And the reason why it's exempt is not because I'm replacing windows, is because I'm replacing windows of a historic facade. And that's what gives me the exception to the energy code. So let's talk about our compliance options and why would we go one direction versus another. So as we start designing a building, we should be thinking about how are we meeting the energy code? And we go through schematic design, design documents, construction documents, and it's crazy to me how often projects don't even think about the energy code till the week before they're going for permit, and they go, oh, that's right, we have the energy code. Well, let's get someone to throw something together, and we're going to give them a 24-hour turnaround for them to tell us our design is beautiful. Guess what, guys? The energy code is just so complicated and robust that after the fact is no longer going to work. You are costing the project money. You are costing the project time by not considering how the energy code is going to be integrated into the design while you're designing. You should be getting someone on board, whether it's an energy consultant, I don't care who it is, that is thinking about all of your discussions and all your development of the design documents and how is it meeting or not meeting the energy code. And what do we want to do? Do we want to redesign? If we find out about it super early on in the project, redesigning is a total viable option as long as it's still meeting the project goals. But if I wait too long, in which now if I change a building feature, that is going to change the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing, and everything else going on, I have just created a complete traffic stop of how the project is going to get into the building department for plan check in a timely fashion. So we do suggest at Energy Code ACE that you really think about an integrated design process, of which, as we even start thinking about the project, we start assessing the site for PV. We start assessing the site in terms of what configuration of the site is going to be most advantageous to energy performance and offsetting peak load conditions. Maybe we shouldn't face that wall of glass facing west. Let's tweak it and have it be facing east instead. Now, I know there's some things it's not as simple as that. I get it. But having someone bringing up these conversation points from the very beginning means that design is going to smoothly go through its entire process and go smoothly through the building department and via construction. The certificate of compliance, in my opinion, should purely be a checklist of what's already in the design documents that is supporting the energy code. Anyone that's depending on these certificate of compliance forms, that's the only thing that's telling us what that building needs to meet the energy code, that's a big fail. You have failed right there because the certificate of compliance is to support the design. The certificate of compliance is not supposed to live on its own as a means of saying how the building should be built to meet the energy code, incorporated into the design from day one. So that when we start building the building, and our contractors are going to be responsible for providing certificate of installation forms that everything they installed is meeting The promise is made in the certificate of compliance form that's integrated into the design set. Now, if the certificate of compliance is just what's designed, immediately the contractor is going to know what to install because he knows. And he's not going to see some note on the window schedule saying, see Title 24 docs. That doesn't help anyone. We want to make sure that all the products, all the design features are meeting the energy code and that we've made it as easy as possible for the contractor to understand what's needed of them by a minimum so that they can support it with that certificate of installation, that what they installed is equal or better than what the designers promised for the project. We also then have testing. So we have two groups of testing protocols. Acceptance testing it could be the contractor. It just is someone that is taking the special time to verify either installed features such as the windows, or is testing certain things is working properly to the schedules of the project, such as mechanical equipment, and is affirming that it is done in a way to support energy savings. This can be done by the contractor. It might have to be done by a certified acceptance test technician. It depends on the building feature, but we need to plan for this. We need to make sure our contractors are aware of the testing protocols out in the field and who is allowed to do what. I just had a project that was done in my little local town here. I will live in a little teeny town, and I gave them such a break on the price to do the calculations for them. And I wrote up this whole note block. I said, put this in your drawing set that talks to the contractor about who they need to engage to do the acceptance testing and who they need to engage to do the verification testing. Verification testing must be done by a third party inspector that is not employed or related in any way to the installing contractor. That's not true for acceptance testing. It can be the contractor. They could be related to the contractor. They just need to be certified if it's mechanical and lighting equipment. And really tried to make sure that the contractors knew before you're towards the end, make sure all of this is in place so everything can go smoothly for final. They didn't read it at all, nor did they put it in the drawing set. And so they're like, you never told us that. And I'm like, here's this email with a note block I gave you, and I told you put it in the drawing set, and you decided not to. And now you can't final because your building department is not giving you your certificate of occupancy because you did not have the appropriate people do the acceptance and verification testing. And it became a nightmare, let me tell you. Let's not set up the projects to go crazy at the very end. Let's make sure it goes smoothly from day one. How much effort we put in the beginning is really going to show and help reduce the effort and the cost to be compliant towards the end. We strongly believe this at Energy Code ACE. You got to start from day one. You can't think about it right before you go in for the building department, and you can't leave that contractor without a full set of specs that really help them understand what products and also what testing is going to be needed for the project. And when we're talking about zero net carbon design goals, being able to calculate you're calculating all those building features. And what if it wasn't really clear that you meant this type of insulation by this manufacturer that had this very specific carbon metric, and the contractor used whatever they found at their distributor that was the cheapest, and it didn't meet any of the goals of the project because it was not clearly documented in the design drawings. Let's make it better. Let's do better. Commissioning. Commissioning is required for new non-residential buildings by the Energy Code. They are not required for residential buildings, and they are not required for additions or alterations. And the Energy Code does not have the word major renovation defined. Major renovations are alterations per the Energy Code, unless the building department decides, hey, you're making so many changes, we're going to make you meet the building code in its entirety as new construction. Why we want to bring this up is because the commissioning process is what we should be using for all projects. Let's have that kickoff meeting and decide who's doing what are the goals for the project, How are we going to make sure compliance to the energy code is being reviewed and achieved as we're designing the building? And let's make sure we have the right people in place that are going to be doing design review before you go in for permit. Establishing the owner project requirements in a document that everyone can read and be aware of as they're designing. I mean, that's incredibly valuable. And I, as an energy consultant, hang my hat on the basis of design. This is how that equipment is meant to function within the building. And me determining energy compliance without having a basis of design can be close to impossible. And this is a very important document for us to be looking at. What are the mechanical systems, electrical systems, the use of the envelope, what's going on with PV and battery, what are the schedules, what are the desires of utility bills of the particular project. There's so much I can get out of this. And then, of course, making sure there's a thorough design review with the appropriate person that's going to be in place. So we would like to challenge all of you to be thinking about commissioning for all your projects, even if they're not triggered. The Energy Code ACE website has a tool called the Virtual Compliance Assistant. Remember, that's the one that's going to help us produce the non-residential, multifamily, and hotel motel compliance documents. Well, why not use the NRCC CXR form for all your projects? Just because you use the tool doesn't mean you have to submit that form. Use it as a process. The Virtual Compliance Assistant allows you to invite people to the project, allow them to make comments, allow people to collaborate. This is a tool that can really help simplify how you're going about designing your projects, making sure it's on target, and it's free. I mean, how can you fight with that, right? So let's walk through what are all these energy efficiency goals and really think about them, document them, and support them well within our design documents to help save the planet so much faster and make our building owners incredibly happy with their buildings. When we show compliance in the energy code, we have mandatory measures, we have those prescriptive measures, and the ability to use the performance approach to get flexibility. At the end of the day, we want those compliance documents, that certificate of compliance. I'm not going to talk anymore about how important it is to really be thinking about when do we start this? When do we do it and who's going to do it? So the prescriptive approach allows people to work in silos. Some projects, that's a goal. They want people to work simultaneously and they're one day just going to go, voila, here's the entire design package. None of us talk to each other and it's all going to work. I find that that might work for projects that have very limited complexity, such as a simple TI, a single family home. Yeah, there are things where there are simple design choices that allow us to use the prescriptive approach, but it means we're sacrificing flexibility and we're sacrificing the ability to work on a building to meet current certain goals that incorporate all of the design features, which we do get with the performance approach. So the performance approach allows us flexibility, but it's also measuring your design. This is your design as the sun is going over it 365 days a year as the sun rotates to your climate zone with the humidity, the temperatures, the wind loads, the elevation all incorporated into it. And it has additional metrics associated with carbon emissions and source energy and energy use that can be invaluable in figuring out how your designs are meeting your design goals. So when you're thinking about not just having everyone work in a silo and that you have measured goals that you have to accomplish, really consider using the performance approach, which will require the entire design team to work together. I have a lot of projects where mechanical went and did their thing, electrical went and did their thing, and the architect is sitting there going, but what about me? And they go in for permit, and the first building comment they get is, where is the calculations proving the envelope is meeting the energy code? And then there's all this finger pointing that goes on. And how can we know what our mechanical systems are if we don't thoroughly vet the envelope? because our mechanical system sizing is in part dictated on the loads associated with the envelope. If you disconnect it, you're getting a very disjointed install. So when we talk about forms, all of our single family forms will start with CF for compliance form. Well, that wasn't very helpful. Our non-residential forms start with NR for non-residential. Yay, that's making more sense. Oh, but it also applies to hotel, motel, and high-rise multifamily. Well, now I'm confused again. Low-rise multifamily, all those forms start with LM for low-rise multifamily. Yay, that makes sense. So the names of the forms really honestly don't make that much sense to the scope of the project, except for the brand new LMCC forms that were introduced in this 2022 code cycle. For low-rise multifamily buildings, those are buildings that have an R occupancy that is multifamily, that is 3 habitable stories or less, even if it's a mixed-use occupancy. We then also have the prescriptive approach that breaks things out into the different building features. And for single family, depending upon the scope of the work, new construction, additions, or alterations. All our other building types, I don't care if it's new construction, addition, or alteration, it's the same exact prescriptive compliance form. But look how segmented everything is. I have to go amongst many different documents to determine what's happening to my project design for compliance to the energy code. One of the reasons I love the performance approach is it helps bring together the envelope, the mechanical, the lighting, the electrical, the PV, the battery systems, all into one document. Now, the issue with the performance approach is it only supports conditioned floor area. Any unconditioned areas of the building, any features outside of the building, such as outdoor lighting, do not get to be incorporated into the performance calculation, which is the bubble around the conditioned area of the buildings only. So when I think about my different building features, well, that would be the envelope that's containing the heated or cooled air of my mechanical systems, of which my water heating systems are serving, and that solar photovoltaic and battery system is serving. But when I think about lighting, I have to think about, is that lighting in a conditioned space, meaning it can go in that performance approach with these other building features? Is the lighting in an unconditioned space? Well, then it must use the prescriptive pathway. So it's not even as simple as I have one lighting form, I have one envelope form. You might have to really think about how compliance is achieved based on if that lighting, that particular building feature is in a conditioned space or a non-conditioned space. I'm hoping what I'm conveying to you guys is there's a lot of complexity behind the energy code, and get an expert to help you and make sure that expert knows what they're doing. I'm going to apologize right now to all those mechanical engineers in the room that produce the Title 24 documents for the projects. Do you really know everything about the energy code to support it the way it needs to be done so that it's cost effective, installable, enforceable, and my building owner is happy? How do we measure compliance to the energy code? So in that performance approach, we measure efficiency against the prescriptive measures of the energy code, and that is our long-term system cost efficiency metric. We also measure source energy, which is a carbon proxy of the energy uses, how much energy uses, and what utility type are we using, and then how much of all of that are you offsetting with on-site renewables? Very similar, and it's part of the idealisms of the zero net carbon design goals of California. Our total score looks at the total efficiency of the building, and then how much on-site renewables do we have associated with the project as compared to the prescriptive requirements for on-site photovoltaic systems and on-site battery storage systems. We have to show compliance to all of them. It's crazy to me how often people don't look to see if their report says complies. I get it, it can be difficult. It's this one little teeny line item, but you, as the ones who are taking responsibility for the information in these forms, make sure it complies. And here you can see we have our efficiency metric. Here is that total metric, that's efficiency plus renewables on site. Here is our source energy metric. And brand new for single family only in this next code cycle, we are going to have a brand new peak cooling metric for certain climate zones. And this is being introduced for the very first time. It will not apply to non-residential multifamily or hotel motel buildings, but it will apply to single family. There's a lot going on here. And how do we know where shifting something is going to make an impact to one of these measurements or potentially all of these measurements? So what compliance pathway do you think is going to support this project scope? I'm replacing an HVAC piece of equipment. Do you think that is a good approach to use prescriptive? I'm in my silo. It's only that one piece of equipment. It doesn't speak to anything else. Or would I potentially look at the performance approach in which I'm looking at the entire package of the building and determining what type of flexibility I want? Yeah, this is pretty simplistic. I'm only replacing a piece of equipment. And when I just have one building feature, typically I'm going to be using that prescriptive approach because there's not much else for me to gain flexibility of. Now, sometimes I'll have a client go, Gina, we want an electric resistance heater. And I'll go, that totally does not meet the prescriptive requirements. Oh my gosh, what are you thinking? Well, do you think you can use the performance approach and offset the penalty of using electric resistance heating? Usually I'll go, no. But sometimes I'll go, well, are you willing to update the walls, the floors, the windows, and everything in that home to get credit just to use an electric resistance water heater and a space heater instead of a heat pump? And that's when we have to have serious conversations about what's going to make the most sense for the project, the budget, and the goals. I am building a brand new apartment building. What do you think is the best approach? Prescriptive, everyone works in their own silo and they don't have to communicate at all. Or the performance approach, where we have some goals we want to work towards and every single building feature is going to be measured as meeting. That's right, that's going to be B. Thank you very much for all of that, everyone. Here I have a brand new medical office building that is going zero net carbon design and LEED platinum. Which method do I have to use for this project? That's right. Because of these goals, I am dictated in using the performance approach to be able to use the output to support those project system requirements. Mara is asking, when using the prescriptive approach to replace HVAC, do you follow the code based on the code of the year the building was built or the code in place when you are submitting for permit? It's all about the code that applies when you submit for permit. So if I'm replacing this mechanical system, I have to meet the replacement mechanical system requirements of this code cycle that is in play when you submit for permit. So that's why I'm going to ask you, you're going to submit for permit before the end of the year, or are you going to do this next year? Because I need to look at what's going to be most advantageous for your project, but I'm not going to do that effort unless you tell me, yeah, Gina, we're committed and we're ready to get it in before the end of the year, and let us know if that is the best approach. There are some things changing in the energy code, especially for single family for 2025, in which it's more advantageous to use next code cycle than it would be to use current code cycle. Those are part of the discussions that have to be made. And don't ignore the compliance reports. So remember, you're signing and taking responsibility as dictated by the Business and Professions Code, Division 3. Your liability insurance is on the line. I have had people sign and go, this isn't my fault. I'm like, no, you signed as the responsible person. You have to take responsibility. That's not me. I'm your documentation author. I am not the responsible person. So let's make sure your design is matching the checklist within the certificate of compliance form. Let's make sure the project scope matches and also the conditioned floor area. That's one of my #1 plan check comments is the conditioned floor area does not match what's stated in the drawing set. And there's reasons for that. We have to have a conversation. Are you documenting habitable floor area for taxes? Are you documenting lot coverage for taxes, or are you documenting conditioned floor area that meets a very specific definition by the energy code? And we might have to list more than one square footage depending upon what it is representing. Make sure you feel that what you're seeing in these certificate of compliance forms matches your project scope and size. Location and azimuth. Climate zone matters. So let's make sure that this is really truly representing the correct climate zone. There's a beautiful map that the CEC has put out that is layered on top of Google Earth that you just put in your address and it goes, and it shows you exactly what your climate zone is. You don't have to be an expert like me. You just have to use a tool. Orientation, that azimuth is so important. Because remember, this is documenting 365 days a year as the sun is going over your design. And if I'm saying it's facing west versus facing east, that is going to change the load profile of that building considerably and is going to change how it meets the energy code. Renewables. I see a lot where people are promising a minimum PV kW and even a battery kWh, but I see nothing in the drawing set because they plan on doing a deferred submittal for those building features. This needs to be coordinated ahead of time because these requirements are built into this building permit, and the energy code says unless those systems are installed and signed off on, the building permit cannot be finalized. But your building department might have a process that makes it difficult to actually keep that building permit and the PV and battery permit together so that this can go smoothly. And are you making sure your design sets are supporting where the PV system is, the slope, the tilt of the PV system, the size of the PV system, and also where the battery is going, knowing that batteries have special requirements in terms of the fire code, in terms of location, access, ventilation, and potential fire suppression systems. In this particular situation, this plan set says nothing about the battery, and it's this elusive one little line that do most people even know what this means within this report? If you don't know what something means in this report, ask the person who did the calculations for you. Make them earn their buck, man. We are the most expensive energy consultant for single family that there is because we walk you through all of this line by line and we make sure your plan sets are supporting these requirements. I am not $99 in a 24-hour time period. And when you use a company like that, what you're also potentially losing is the ability to communicate with the person who's doing it and making sure you understand that what's in this checklist of a certificate of compliance form can actually be supported by your design, the scope, and the budget of the project. When we're talking about various envelope features, I tell all my, do a mentoring program and I insist that the mentees learn to put your detail numbers into the name of the assembly. So here it's saying this is on sheet A3. Right there, the building department, the contractor, everyone knows where to go in the plan set to confirm exactly is this detail really truly supporting for exterior walls, that it's a 2x4 wall with R21, huh? How am I going to fit R21 and a 2x4? Oh, that means I'm going to have to do spray insulation plus R5 on the outside of the framing of that wall. Is that what your detail represents? This detail represents a 2x6 wood cavity, not a 2x4. When we're talking about roofs, unfortunately, I am not a lover with how the certificate of compliance supports the attic ceiling and the attic roof. It's two different parts and we look at them separately. What do I have insulation at the roof deck? What do I have insulation wise at the ceiling of the attic? You have to look in more than one place for some of these features. Windows, we find that a lot of people just say, yeah, vinyl windows. These are getting even more stringent in our next code cycle. You have to do the hard work and research. Is your window products going to be able to meet these requirements? 9 times out of 10, they're not. Do you have the specs that are the mechanical equipment type, size, and efficiency fully supported within your design documents. Water heaters are specific now. A heat pump water heater, I need the make and model number. It's not generic, it's specific. And I need that to be supported in your design documents. And what we get out of using the performance approach is we get measurements. So we get measurements against the energy code. We have the source energy metric. And we also have energy use summaries, which just is the actual energy use. And we also have kBTU per square foot per year. And within the software itself, we have CO2 measurements. So there's so much that's included. Now, the CO2 doesn't show up in the certificate of compliance, but it's something you can ask to have be given to you by the person who is doing your calculations. So I'm going to skip this since we're at the end of our time together. I'm hoping you guys are excited to learn more, do more. We have these 2.5-hour sessions that get offered every 3 weeks live on our website by Martin Dodd. We have a series of small bite videos that we're putting out there to make this easier to understand. We have fact sheets on the 2025 Energy Code, and we're here to answer your questions. If you click any of these buttons on our website, you'll either get me or Brian Selby answering your questions. Whew. Are there any questions I have not answered yet? Someone did ask about my mentoring program, which is through Quebec, and I'm going to put that website in the chat. If you guys want to sign up for that mentoring program, we start in January and we welcome all people. Rebecca, did you want to come in and say anything?
I will, just mirroring all of the thank yous in the chat. Gina, we appreciate you so much. Energy Code Ace, thanks again to you. Thanks to Dave in the chat for all the help there. And I hope that we see you again soon. We'll submit your CE if you qualified, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.